My name is Carlton Cartwright. I'm the Executive Director of the Veterans Memorial and Multicultural Histories Incorporated. Today is Saturday, October 30th, 2021, and we are at, what Marriott is this?
Orlando World Center.
Thank you, Orlando World Center, Marriott. And sir, what is your name?
Go by Monty Hand. It's actually Montgomery Hand.
Okay. And when is your birthday?
4th of November, 1955.
And what city do you live in?
Owens Crossroads, Alabama.
Okay. And what branch of the service were you in?
Air Force.
And are you still in?
No, I retired in 2005.
How many years was that?
28 years,
Wow.
some number of days and some number of hours, which I didn't really count, but 28.
Were you drafted or enlisted?
I was a 4-year Air Force ROTC scholarship recipient.
Oh, okay, cool. And where were you at the time that you went into the military?
Well, I was commissioned in May and moved back home from university, and so I was in Bowie, Maryland, and then came on active duty in Rantoul, Illinois at Chanute Air Force Base.
Okay.
6 months. 6 months after commissioning.
What were you doing before you went into service?
Well, 4 years of university at Syracuse and various and sundry summer jobs.
Okay. All right. What were you majoring in?
Political science and international relations.
Oh, okay, nice. Nice. All right. What was your rank when you separated?
Lieutenant Colonel when I retired.
Okay. And so you entered, where did you say you entered into the military? Where?
Well, I actually started on active duty at Chanute Air Force Base in Rantoul, Illinois.
Okay. And where was basic training?
Well, 4-year ROTC, so I did go to field training, which we all called summer camp, at Dover Air Force Base.
And how long did that go on?
4 weeks.
4 weeks.
Yes.
Okay. So tech school, what did you do for tech school?
Aircraft maintenance officers course, 6 months at Chanute Air Force Base.
Okay. All right. 6 months, 24 weeks.
Yep.
Wow. All right.
Yep. Right through the heart of the winter in Illinois.
Wow. Nice. So anyway, first duty base was where?
After training, Charleston Air Force Base, South Carolina.
Oh, okay. Okay. And how long was that first tour?
I was there a little bit over 18 months as a C141 aircraft maintenance branch chief.
Okay. And I'm sorry, how long did you say? I'm sorry.
A little over 18 months.
Okay. All right. A little over. Okay. And so tell us about that. How was that tour?
Well,
and what did it consist of?
I was, as a brand new 6-month second lieutenant, I was made a branch chief. I had 20 C-141s under my responsibility and 126 airmen and NCOs.
Wow.
At age 22.
And what rank were you at that moment?
Second lieutenant.
Oh, Lord. Okay. All right.
You bet.
Yeah. Besides the anxiety, the stress, and the pressure, how was the food?
There actually wasn't that much anxiety, stress, or pressure. I enjoyed learning the airframe and learning people and learning people management. It was and leadership, more importantly than management at that time in the Air Force.
Okay. Okay. Up until that moment, through your ROTC, basic training, and tech school, and that first tour in the Carolinas, any casualties? Anybody get hurt? Any injuries? How about for yourself or anyone else?
No, not that I recollect. Okay. No.
Nothing drastic.
Nothing major. No. Yes. No.
Okay. All right. Nice. How was life outside of the base in you said Charleston, right?
In Charleston.
Yeah.
Oh, it was great. Go to the beach at Kiowa, and downtown Charleston was neat, and yeah, it was. When I wasn't, I tended to work shift work also, so mostly days and swings, as the flight line OIC over the entire operation.
Right.
So it was busy. It was a learning time.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
but life was good.
Excellent. Okay, so you said you were in Charleston for 18 months. Where'd you go next?
Torreon Air Base, Spain.
Ah, okay. And how long was that tour?
That was about 18 months also.
And what year was that? Because Spain has a very interesting history.
I always have to do the math on that one. Let me see, 80 to January of 81 to, no, January of 80 to into 81. I replaced, it was a very short notice PCS because one of the individuals in the squadron, one of the officers in the squadron had a humanitarian.
Right.
And they came around and said, hey, who would like to go to Spain? And I said, I would like to go to Spain. And so I accepted the assignment and off I went.
Okay. And what did it entail? What was, I know there's been a particular type and kind of politics in Spain.
Well, so that wasn't too long after Franco had gone. So Spain was a lot different than it is today,
Okay.
to put it mildly. A lot more controlled, but in some ways a lot less controlled. Automobiles for the masses, if you will, were pretty new. So automobile accidents and crazy driving and actually automobile theft. Somebody tried to steal my car while I lived there.
Wow.
So,
okay.
But I was still in aircraft maintenance there in the that time MAC en route squadron on a on a USAF F4 base.
Okay. So were there any incidences, political or any kind of engagement with our military and on Spanish soil?
No, not really. Bing Crosby died while I was there.
Oh, really?
But yeah, he was supposed to be golfing, and but that's another story.
Okay.
No, there were not. We didn't really work with the Spaniards. I mean, it was their base.
Right.
We had to have Spanish ID cards. We had to. They controlled us at the gate. But there were no political issues or incidents. But the society was much tighter than it is today, and the police were a lot more powerful. The Guardia Civils, and you didn't mess with those guys. You knew where to draw the line when you were off the base.
Sounds familiar. Where else did you get to travel while you were in Spain?
Actually, my only real TDY when I was in Spain was back to Dover, Delaware to go to C5 engine run school.
Okay.
But I did travel on my own.
R&R.
And, some R&R, yep, went up to Andorra, went to Garmisch skiing on a trip.
Where's Andorra? Is that in Spain?
Andorra is between France and Spain in the Pyrenees Mountains.
Okay.
Very small country.
And Garmisch?
Yes, Garmisch, Germany, to go skiing for an Air Force recreation ski week from Spain.
Okay. Any place else?
No, that was really. I'm sorry, I went to Portugal for a weekend.
Okay.
So
All right.
it was yes.
Nice. Okay, so after that 18 months, what was the next duty station?
So I was selected to go to undergraduate pilot training. And so I went to Vance Air Force Base, Enid, Oklahoma, via San Antonio, Texas, where I did flight screening program in the T-41, which is a Cessna 172.
Okay.
So did flight screening, and then went to Vance and flew T-37s and T-38s.
Nice. Okay. All right. Okay, and you wound up where now? After that training in San Antonio?
Vance, Enid, Oklahoma.
And how long were you there?
About a year.
And what were your duties there?
I was a student pilot.
Oh, so you were training?
Yes, in training.
Purely okay, that entire time.
Yes.
Okay, and so where did that training take you after that?
Well, it actually took me to navigator training because less than a month before graduation, I was unable to meet the syllabus requirements in the T-38 formation phase. So I'm technically a pilot training washout, but I was selected to go to navigator school from there.
Where was that?
Mather Air Force Base, California.
Okay, and how long did you stay there?
About a year again.
Okay.
A little bit less than.
12 months, okay.
Yeah, a little bit less than.
And up to this point, by the way, have you had any problems staying in touch with your family, or you feel like you had everything that you needed as far as supplies or equipment?
I had absolutely everything. If you're interested, I met my wife in Enid, Oklahoma.
Absolutely.
Got married between pilot training and nav school.
Right.
And my wife's brother and I were in the same class in the same section at pilot training, and that's kind of one of those, the rest they say is history. We met, she came out to visit and do some things for her brother, and we met and hit it off, and almost 40 years later, here I am today.
Congratulations.
Still married.
Okay. So after that 12-month navigator school, where were you ordered to go?
Well, I was #1 graduate in my class, distinguished graduate, Commander's Cup and Husick Trophy awardee, if you're interested. So I got my first choice of assignment, which was C-130s at McChord Air Force Base, just outside of Tacoma, Washington.
What was that trophy?
The Husick Memorial Trophy.
What is that?
That's for the most outstanding officer in the class.
Wow. Okay.
I was class commander because I was the senior officer. I was a captain. I actually pinned on captain while I was advance.
Okay.
So.
Congratulations. So now you wound up in Tacoma?
Yes.
And what were your duties there?
I was, for the first year in the squadron, I was, because I was a late rated guy, I flew my backside off. Got about 1,000 hours of flying time in my first year.
Right.
Because I couldn't turn down a mission, and I didn't want to turn down a mission. But I also got some special quals while I was there. Because, again, Air Force career-wise, I needed to do more to catch up to my wing-wearing peers, if you will.
Okay.
So that was all very interesting, doing air drop, air land, and a couple of different special missions, including low altitude parachute extraction system missions, which the Air Force doesn't do anymore, but known as LAPES. Something that we learned in Vietnam.
Okay. There was a question I wanted to ask you. Oh, what were you flying on?
C-130E models.
Wow. Okay.
62 and 63 model airplanes.
And were they cargo or?
Yes. Well, I mean, yeah, C-130 cargo turboprop, 4-engine turboprop airplanes, cargo passengers, affectionately known as trash haulers. I don't think we ever hauled any trash, but we hauled a lot of interesting things.
Yeah. Okay. And where did those missions take you?
Well, our primary missions in the C-130, our channel missions that we flew 3 times a week, were up to Alaska.
Oh.
But we also, like I said, we flew a lot of different missions, and we flew special missions. We would do crazy things like, that seemed crazy, like flying Navy torpedoes from Whidbey Island Naval Air Station to Andros Town in the Bahamas, or pick them up in Andros Town and bring them back. Andros Town is where the Navy torpedo test range is. But other things, a lot of trips to Fort Benning, Georgia, to let Army basic paratroopers or paratroopers jump out of the back. Fort Bragg, Pope Air Force Base, at that time North Carolina, for the 82nd Airborne to do their airborne jumps out of the C-130s.
Wow.
So a lot of time with the Army, a lot of time moving things. Also various and sundry airlift exercises that I participated in either as an aircrew member, hauling stuff to different places.
Okay, okay. And any casualties? Anybody get hurt in your unit? Any fatalities?
Not in my unit, but if you don't mind if I jump ahead, after a year in the squadron, I moved to the airlift control element, which was the wing mobility function that built mobility packages that deployed in support of exercise, ground support of exercises and real-world contingencies. And in that job, yes, I definitely saw some injuries. None fatal in that job, but some pretty serious loading and unloading instances of the airplane.
So there's a certain amount of hazardous duty, huh?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. Incredible. Okay, so you made trip. What part of Alaska did you?
Both to both to Anchorage at Elmendorf Air Force Base and Fairchild to Eielson Air Force Base. That was our again our primary, our weekly 3 times a week missions went to those 2 bases.
Did you see any combat at all?
No, I did not.
Good. Not unhappy about that. Okay. Tell me about 2 of your most memorable experiences during your military career up to this point.
Well, being in the airlift control element, it was quite a broad range of places and events. Going to Team Spirit in Korea as a command and control augmentee. It was the first time I'd been to Korea, working with our Korean allies. That was extremely fascinating. Probably one of the most fascinating things about it was eating Korean food, which is heavily laced with garlic, and realizing that you had to eat Korean food so that you could work around the Koreans in self-defense, as it were. And the add-on to that is when I got home and my wife picked me up at the airport, she said, "What is that smell?" Because for those who don't know, garlic comes out your pores when you eat enough of it. I also, as a wing, we deployed to Bright Star in 1986, so to Cairo, Egypt.
Okay.
And worked somewhat with the Egyptians, but it was a very large, multifaceted exercise, airlift, fighters, bombers, and working with the Egyptians. I had been to Egypt once before, but being deployed there and living in a tent on Cairo West Air Base was an interesting experience, and working noon to midnight or midnight to noon so that you could get some cooler sleeping time, because that was well before the days of air-conditioned tents, climate-controlled, everything. So.
And how long were you there?
At McCord.
What state is that?
Washington.
That was in
Washington State.
And you were there for 18 months?
No, I was in the squadron for a year, and then I was in the ALSI for about 2.5 years after that. So
ALSI?
Airlift Control Element.
Gotcha.
So about 3.5 years total in Washington State.
Okay. But during that time you traveled to Africa? Traveled to
Africa. Spent a lot of time quite often in Canada, supporting exercise Maple Flag in Cold Lake, Canada.
That consisted of what?
It's actually it's similar to Red Flag in Nevada, except at Maple Flag in Canada, there's a lot more open space, and airplanes could fly lower, they could fly faster, they could do a lot of different things. So as a MAC airlift control element, we planned the arrival and departure of the support aircraft for the fighters and the helicopters and the bombers that would come to Maple Flag, and we would do that. There were always 2 periods of Maple Flag with a swap out in the middle, so we would deploy for the deployment, the swap out, and then the redeployment over a period of 4 to 6 weeks, depending on how the exercise ran.
Okay, I didn't mean to cut you off before. Where else? I think you were getting ready to share where else you traveled.
That was most of the foreign travel.
Okay.
From McCord.
Okay. So next duty station was?
Next duty station in October of 1986 to Rhein-Main Air Base, Germany, where I once again flew C-130s as a forward, what we called a forward navigator,
right,
on a covert reconnaissance mission over East Germany.
Okay.
Which has now been declassified.
Oh, so tell us about it.
So our squadron had 3 C-130s, which had a photo mission and a intelligence gathering, electronics gathering mission as well. The squadron's history actually went back to 1946, where they had in various airplanes done this same mission from various bases in Germany, but ended up with 3 airplanes at Rhein-Main, where we flew pretty much every day, Monday to Friday, going to Berlin. So based on the treaty after World War II over East Germany, which was controlled by the Soviets, there were 3 corridors, north, center, and south, that flew into Berlin.
Right.
And then there was what was called the control zone, which was a circle over the city of Berlin, which was an open circle for navigation, so you could land at any one of the 3 Berlin Allied Air Forces bases, because the French, the British, and the Americans occupied West Berlin, and the Soviets occupied East Berlin. But from our ability to fly in and out in the corridors, as well as fly in the control zone, we could image and or collect on about better than 60% of the group of Soviet forces in Germany.
Okay. Any incidents?
Other than being intercepted by the Soviets a couple of times, nothing major. a little bit of puckering, yes.
Okay.
And we knew they were watching us, and they knew what we were doing, even though our mission was highly classified.
Right.
We did it every day for so many years. That they would have had to have been complete knuckleheads to not know what we were doing. And actually, there was a time when they stamped out in the snow, "Merry Christmas, 7405th Op Squadron."
Okay. All right, so hello and goodbye.
Yeah. So I flew in the squadron for exactly 2 years to get credit for that assignment, and then I moved to Ramstein Air Base, where I became the program manager for that mission.
Okay.
So managing the funding and the operational support, coordinating with the air staff and U.S. Forces Europe, U.S. UCOM, U.S. European Command.
Right.
Because we were not alone out there by ourselves. A lot of people paid attention to what we were doing and when we were doing it, and all of our missions were approved, actually at the White House level, but it was delegated down to the Joint Chiefs of Staff to approve our missions every day because of the potential threat to us over that part of the world, over that part of the country.
Okay. And how long did, so what year is it now when you finished that tour?
Well, I moved to Ramstein in October of 1988.
Oh, okay, from Rhein-Main.
From Rhein-Main.
Oh, so you're still staying in Germany?
Still staying in Germany. I still flew with the squadron as an attached navigator. So I still continue to collect missions. I have 250 missions over East Germany.
Wow.
Over the then bad guys who could have shot us down anytime they wanted to.
Right.
But they didn't, because they were doing similar things to us. So it was a quid pro quo.
Right.
Kind of an understanding.
Okay.
We think that's what got us going every day.
Right. Okay, made it bearable.
Yep.
Okay, so
yep.
So it's not a very comfortable thought knowing that you're going into airspace that is not friendly.
No, and because several over history, several airplanes, none of our airplanes and none over East Germany of our unit were shot down, but a C-130 was shot down from our ancestral unit was shot down over Armenia with all lives lost, and some others, and there was also T-39 twin engine jet that had taken off out of Wiesbaden, where we were stationed before we moved to Rhein-Main as a unit before my time.
Right.
But it was shot down by the Soviets when it wandered over into East German airspace with the 3 pilots on board killed.
Wow.
So it was, the threat was always there.
Exactly.
The threat was always there.
But that was before your time.
The T-39 shoot down was, and the C-130 shoot down was well before my time.
Okay.
But we flew every day knowing that we could be intercepted, we could be fired on the ground. Historically speaking, the unit in which I flew collected the first data on the SA-2 missiles that shot down airplanes in Vietnam. My unit collected the data, the radar data and the comms data when that first SA-2 was set up in East Germany. And that information was given to Big Air Force and Big DOD and helped in many years prior in the Vietnam War to save aircrew.
Okay. Interesting. Okay, so after Ramstein,
Well, so Ramstein, I managed the program until 1989, 1990, when the Berlin Wall came down. Of course, we're all buddies with everybody, and we were no longer allowed to do covert reconnaissance, so the mission went away. So now we're talking the beginning of Desert Shield, and since I was an airlift guy in headquarters Air Forces Europe, which was a fighter command, nobody knew what to do with me. So I went back to MAC at the time, back to Military Airlift Command, in the 322nd Airlift Division, which managed all the military airlift from the longitude of 10 west, so basically from lodges in the Azores all the way down to Southwest Asia. We managed all the airlift movements and tracked all the airlift movements of Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and then Desert Calm, which was the redeployment from Desert Storm.
and where were you stationed at this time?
That was at Ramstein.
Still.
I worked underground in a bunker, still on Ramstein, until 1991.
And then, any casualties during that period?
Not in my job, just a lot of burnout, because it was
Really?
it was 12-hour shift. Well, I shouldn't say burnout, but 12-hour shift with in brief and out brief, and basically you came in, you got the turnover brief from the previous duty officer and NCOs, and strapped into the seat, as it were, and plugged into the phone and computer, and pretty much didn't get up for 12 hours. Ate at the desk if it had something to eat. My wife was wonderful; she packed me a lunch, but it was very demanding, very interesting, but a lot going on.
Okay.
So yeah, so 89, yeah, 91. So from there, because I happened to be a native Italian speaker,
Right.
We had an airplane had become misplaced. A redeployment airplane, C-141, had become misplaced, is the term I use. So I was talking to Rome, Italy Air Traffic Control, trying to find our errant C-141, and I was speaking in Italian. And so from there, because someone overheard me doing that, I was selected to go be the MAC at that time, detachment commander at Naval Air Station Sigonella, Sicily.
Okay.
Where I oversaw the busiest aerial port and airlift operation in the Mediterranean.
Wow.
Aircraft transiting, and that was through some of the Bosnia stuff, some of the coast of Bosnia, and then of course a lot of redeployment still from the desert.
Right.
And we also moved, there was a base called Comiso that was on Sicily. It was a ground launch cruise missile base, and because of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, we pulled all those ground launch cruise missiles out of Europe, and all the special weapons that were on those missiles came out of Comiso and went out of the airport, air base, Naval Air Station at Sigonella. So we moved quite a bit of special cargo out of there back to the States. A lot of challenges there, working with the Navy, being the only Air Force officer on a Navy base had some real benefits, but it also had, because I was a CO, a commanding officer, so I was equal in status to several other people,
right.
Which made it very interesting. I was a major at the time. I had just pinned on major. So it was very interesting. I learned to speak Navy very well, and spent a lot of time trying to educate the Navy on how not just the Air Force but the DoD does air transportation business, because there are DoD rules and regulations that manage that, not just Air Force rules and regulations that manage that. So that was occasionally challenging, and answering in a sense to two bosses, answering to my Air Force boss, but being a good neighbor and supporting of my Navy brethren there.
Okay. But you're still in Europe, right?
Still in Europe.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And loving it.
How long did you spend in Europe altogether?
Well, the first end of it was 7.5 years. So three consecutive tours, 7.5 years.
Okay.
And
what was the next part?
Pentagon, Air Staff.
Oh, this was the next
Yep.
duty base.
Next duty base was back to the U.S. Never wanted to go to the Pentagon. Too close to home. Too close to, not so much too close to my parents, too close to home. And the D.C. area where I basically grew up. But that worked out well because I was interviewed kind of in passing while I was at Sigonella by, interestingly, in the small world in which we live, the colonel who interviewed me had flown the same mission that I flew out of Rhine-Main, but in an earlier airplane.
Okay.
So when he said, "What have you done? What do you do? What's your background?" I said, "Well, I did this and that and this." And then I said, "I flew for an organization that's known as the Berlin for Lunch Bunch." And he goes, "Oh, I used to fly in the Berlin for Lunch Bunch." So the great mysteries of the Air Force were once again revealed to them, revealed themselves. But because, not to brag, but I'm multilingual, and had worked with a lot of international officers in various places, I was selected as the Chief of International Standardization in what was then Air Force XOXX Regional Plans and Issues. So for my first year and a half in the Pentagon, I worked, actually not in the Pentagon, I worked in Roslyn as in an out office, but I worked with what's known as a Five Eyes organization. So I worked in an office with 4 other lieutenant colonels, one from UK, one from Canada, one from Australia, and one from New Zealand.
Wow.
And we had our meetings. So I had some absolutely terrific trips to Australia, New Zealand, Canada, United Kingdom, and occasionally to the U.S., someplace else in the U.S.
Okay.
But that was a very interesting and eye-opening, because as someone, and I can't remember who it is right now, and it's not important, once said that we are separated by a common language. So working with Brits and Canadians and Australians and New Zealanders who all speak English, but we all speak English slightly differently. So,
Right.
and we all write slightly differently. So working in a standardization office where you spell things differently and write things differently was just a lot of fun. And I'm still very close friends with a couple of those folks that I worked with in that office.
Okay. Nice.
And I worked there for a year and a half, and then I transitioned into the, if you will, the main office of XOXX, where I was the chief of the NATO division for standardization primarily, but did NATO stuff in general, if you will, for regional plans and issues, which included some trips to Brussels,
Right.
to NATO headquarters, and so back to Europe on occasion, and again working with the international with the air attaches there in Washington D.C.
Okay.
From the various embassies.
Interesting.
It was
Okay.
very interesting.
And were you a colonel by this time?
I pinned on lieutenant colonel right before I left Sigonella, so I arrived at the Pentagon as a brand new lieutenant colonel. But the nice thing is that if it's not people that you've worked with before, they don't know whether you're new, old, or whatever.
Right.
The important thing was to have the rank on.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
And I did.
Right. So, was that your last duty station?
Oh, no, sir. After 3 years at the Pentagon, I went back to Ramstein.
Oh. Okay. In what capacity?
I was the operations, so there was a mishap in the Air Force. Secretary of Commerce, Ron Brown, was killed in a crash of an Air Force T-43, which is a 737 equivalent. And one of the causal findings was that there was not an overarching command and control structure for airlift in the European and actually the Pacific areas of operation, because when the airlift division went away and the Air Force restructured, you had airlift and tanker airplanes that belonged to basically a fighter command, and a lot of the expertise that managed those airplanes was not in the forefront of U.S. Air Forces Europe.
Right.
So an organization was put together. It was called the 24th Air Operations Squadron, where we took over and built back command and control and support of airlift and tanker missions in the European area of responsibility.
Okay.
So I did that for 1 year. Then I moved to the USAF Air Operations Squadron.
Where was that located?
Also at Ramstein.
Okay.
Back down in the bunker where I had worked in 322nd Airlift Division.
Right.
There for a year I was Chief of Contingency Plans for Air Forces Europe. And after a year of doing that and deploying to Vicenza, Italy in support of Bosnia operations with NATO for 100 days, I moved over in the same bunker at Ramstein to be the Chief of Readiness for Air Forces Europe.
Okay.
Supporting.
Operational readiness, yes. Operational readiness, yes.
Yep.
Okay. Up to this point, again, casualties, any incidences, any international,
Well,
conflicts.
Well, Bosnia and Kosovo.
Right.
So as Chief of Plans and especially Chief of Readiness, we supported, along with the Air Mobility Organization that was by then on Ramstein, we did all the support from deployment, support, redeployment, medevac, casevac, tracked daily briefings twice a day of what was going on in Bosnia and Kosovo,
Right.
In the appropriate time frame, as well as still Northern and Southern Watch in Iraq were ongoing, and of course all those airplanes and their support units transited through Europe, so we kept an eye on supporting that requirement as well, along with USAF units deploying down to Iraq at that time.
Okay.
So direct impact, direct casualties. No, I mean, if you want to know, I had 2 attempted suicides at that time, but
Wow.
both unsuccessful, thankfully.
Right.
But no direct casualties or combat impact, combat casualties or anything like that.
Okay, so I take it that the functioning as you grew in rank, the job sounds apparently they were more of a support nature.
Yes, a lot. Yes, I mean when I stopped flying, then absolutely logistics. When people ask me what I did in the Air Force, my first answer is a lot of things, but the majority of my time was in logistics in logistics operations, as in readiness. Well, as well as in plans. I had folks that worked for me or with whom I worked. I mean, I had civil engineers, manpower, personnel, comms, operations, maintenance. Operations is in aircraft operations, maintenance, and then also global joint operational. I got to think of what JOPS stands for, but anyhow, the computer system, I can't remember it now,
Right.
I'm sorry.
No problem.
But the computer system that tells people, once you put the data in, tells people where to go. So it was, yes, long answer to your short question, yes, support, but pretty much the entire spectrum of support to include, I mean, my 2 CE guys, one of them was a firefighter. So he did firefighting deployment requirements, and the other one was a services NCO. He did both meals and billeting requirements. He didn't make reservations and such, but also services does casualty assistance and casualty support. So we were overall, I had responsibility for all those daily operational events through my supporting role, I guess would be the best way to explain it.
Okay, so was that your final duty base?
No, sir. It was my final duty base. It was not my final duty assignment.
Okay.
So after 3 years in USAF,
Right.
We really did want to stay at Ramstein because our son was now getting into high school age, and across the base was at that time the 621st Air Mobility Support Group, which eventually became the 721st 725th Military Operations Group. Anyhow, so I became the operations officer. Again, pretty much a support, because we didn't own any airplanes, but the 721st at that time, 721st AMOG, owned all the en route locations from Lodges Air Base in the Azores all the way down to Prince Sultan Air Base, initially Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia, as well as Kuwait International Airport, as well as eventually Al Udeid. The mobility support at all those locations were my overarching responsibility as the operations officer. I had the aerial port guys worked for me, the contracting guys worked for me, command and control, plans and programs, and some other functions. So that led to a lot of travel to those. One of the locations was Ramstein. Obviously, I just had to walk to the next building to work with those guys, but traveling to 13 other locations from the Azores all the way down to Southwest Asia between basically 2000 and 2005 when I retired.
Okay. All right, so what did you do after you retired?
I hung out at Ramstein a little bit longer. My wife got a job with AFES for a while, and then I was hired on with what eventually became L3 Corporation as a government contractor.
Right.
And I did planning for Joint Chiefs of Staff exercises, and I was the Africa guy. So I did exercise plans, Air Force exercise planning for primarily Army and Marine Corps exercises, but of which the Air Force always provided support, on the continent of Africa. And then I really got to see a lot of interesting places.
Like where?
So, well, Morocco, Tunisia, Mali, Swaziland, which is no longer called Swaziland, South Africa, Ghana, Nigeria, let me think, where else? Those were the main ones, I think.
Okay.
Yes.
Just a few more questions.
Yes, sir. You want to know about my last 2 jobs at Ramstein?
I thought you, go ahead, yes.
I'm sorry.
That's okay, go ahead.
I'm sorry, after 4.5 years as a contractor, I took a GS position as the chief of, well actually, the chief of one. I ran the USAF critical infrastructure program for the air staff, the joint staff, and UCOM. And after a year of doing that, the position was defunded by the Air Force, so I moved to the Ballistic Missile Defense Division at Headquarters United States Air Forces Europe. So I was a ballistic missile defense GS, working with NATO again primarily, NATO allies primarily, and doing ballistic missile defense. And I worked primarily as a logistics officer in that office, supporting requirements.
Okay.
And with that brought, after going to Ramstein for 3 years and staying for 17 and a half, that was the end of my European tour.
Okay. And where did you separate? Were you in the States or were you in Europe?
No, I separated. I retired in December 1st of December 2005 at Ramstein from my AMC job.
Okay. All right. And okay, then you picked up civilian life, and
yes.
Okay, and you finally retired now?
I am retired now.
Since when?
Gosh, I got to do the math again. 2000. I'm sorry, I have to think about this a second.
That's okay.
I've been back in the States 7 years. It's 2021.
Right.
Gosh. My wife is she's the accountant. She
right.
keeps the numbers in
like
her head.
2014, you said 7 years?
Yeah, 2014. Yes,
Gotcha.
Thank you very much.
Not a problem.
Yes, 2014. 2014, we moved back to the States for a variety of reasons. It was time to come home come home.
Right.
And I actually worked for the State Department as an independent contractor for a summer, and that was enough of Washington, D.C.
Life.
Bureaucracy and life for me.
Exactly.
So, yes.
I just have 2 more questions for you.
Okay.
Okay, what...
Then the other one was
did your military experience influence your thinking about war or about the military in general?
NCO, he did. I'm an Army brat. My dad served in World War II and Korea. So I had a pretty good idea what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go. So I don't know if this actually answers your question, but I knew what I was getting myself into, and it didn't. My career opened my eyes in many ways, but it did not change the way I felt about the military.
Okay.
Overall.
Okay. And last question is, how did your service and experiences affect your life?
It enriched it incredibly. I grew up traveling around the world. Being in the military, traveling around the world. My wife, who had lived in 2 houses in the same town until we got married, being able to share the expanding of both of our horizons, and our son, who grew up in Europe, graduated from Ramstein High School, American high school, but traveling on vacations and time off and stuff like that, the military offered all those opportunities, and the stateside life was great too. The camaraderie, the friendships that I made 40 years ago that I've rekindled. One individual I hadn't seen actually 2 friends I hadn't seen for 20 years, and over 20 years I've seen here at ATA, and that's what it's all about. It's sorry.
It's okay.
It's a brotherhood. Sorry. sucks to get old and have these emotions. It's a brotherhood and a sisterhood that I don't think exists anywhere else, at least in U.S. society. So, does that?
The camaraderie, it's like family, and
Absolutely.
the camaraderie is hard to beat.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. People that you learn to rely on, who learn to rely on you, and that builds individuals. It builds characters. Well, it builds some characters also. But I would trade none of it for anything else.
I want to thank you very much for a great interview, and I want to thank you for your service.
Well, thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Hadn't gone over all that stuff in a long time. Not A to Z like that. So
Right.
Thanks. That was a great walk down memory lane for me too.
Right.
Appreciate it.
Okay.
I hope you can use some of it.
I'm going to use all of it.